I ran to the hospital to see my daughter in intensive care. Suddenly, the nurse whispered, "Hide and trust me." I froze behind the door of the next room, my heart pounding. A minute later, what I saw made my blood run cold. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Vincent, and I'm 65 years old. I thought I'd seen enough of life's cruelties by now, but nothing could have prepared me for that phone call on a Tuesday evening in March. I was sitting in my old leather recliner, the same one I'd had for 20 years, watching the evening news when my phone rang. The caller ID showed St. Mary's Hospital. My heart immediately started racing because nobody calls from a hospital with good news at 8:30 at night. "Mr. Thompson? This is Dr. Martinez from St. Mary's Emergency Department. Your daughter Leah has been admitted to our intensive care unit. You need to come immediately." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. My hands started shaking as I gripped the phone tighter. "What happened? Is she okay? Please tell me she's okay." "Sir, I can't discuss details over the phone, but her condition is critical. How soon can you get here?" I don't remember hanging up or grabbing my keys. I don't even remember the drive to the hospital, though it usually takes 25 minutes from my house. All I could think about was Leah, my beautiful 38-year-old daughter who had seemed perfectly healthy when I saw her just 3 days ago at Sunday dinner. The hospital parking lot was nearly empty except for a few cars scattered near the emergency entrance. The fluorescent lights cast an eerie glow over everything, making the whole place feel like something out of a nightmare. I hurried through the automatic doors, my arthritis making each step painful, but I didn't care about the discomfort. At the reception desk, a young woman with tired eyes looked up at me. "I'm Vincent Thompson. My daughter Leah was brought in tonight." Leah Mitchell. She typed something into her computer, then looked at me with that expression medical staff get when they're about to deliver bad news. "She's in the ICU on the 4th floor. Take the elevator to your right, then follow the signs." The elevator ride felt like it lasted forever. Each floor that lit up seemed to mock me with how slowly time was moving. When the doors finally opened on the 4th floor, I was hit with that distinctive hospital smell, antiseptic mixed with something I couldn't identify but that always made my stomach turn. The ICU was a maze of machines, monitors, and people in scrubs moving with urgent purpose. I approached the nurse's station, where a middle-aged woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun looked up from a chart. "I'm looking for my daughter, Leah Mitchell. I'm Vincent Thompson." The nurse, whose name tag read Patricia, glanced around nervously before standing up. "Mr. Thompson, yes, Dr. Martinez is expecting you, but first I need to speak with you privately. It's very important." Something in her tone made my blood run cold. This wasn't the usual hospital protocol. Patricia led me to a small consultation room just off the main hallway. She closed the door behind us and turned to face me, her expression grave. "Mr. Thompson, I'm going to tell you something that might sound strange, but I need you to listen carefully and trust me. Your daughter's condition. There are some unusual circumstances surrounding her admission tonight. I felt my legs go weak and had to sit down in one of the plastic chairs." "What do you mean unusual? What happened to her?" Patricia looked toward the door, then back at me. "She was brought in by her husband and sister around 6 this evening. They said she collapsed at dinner, that she'd been feeling unwell for several weeks. But Mr. Thompson, in my 30 years of nursing, I've seen a lot of things, and something doesn't feel right about this situation. I don't understand. Are you saying someone hurt my Leah? I'm saying you need to be very careful about who you trust right now. Your daughter's husband and sister have been here for hours, and I've overheard some concerning conversations. They don't know you're here yet." My mind was reeling. Leah's husband, David, was a successful accountant, someone I'd never particularly liked but had accepted because Leah loved him. And Sarah, Leah's younger sister by 3 years, had always been jealous of Leah, but I never thought she'd actually hurt her. "What kind of conversations?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia checked her watch and looked toward the door again. "They've been talking about your daughter's condition as if they already know she's not going to recover. They keep mentioning something about paperwork and timelines. Mr. Thompson, I think you should observe them yourself before you make your presence known." She led me out of the consultation room and down a hallway toward the ICU. We stopped at a corner where I could see into the waiting area without being seen. There, sitting in uncomfortable hospital chairs, were David and Sarah. They were leaning close together, talking in hushed tones. "Can you hear what they're saying?" I whispered to Patricia. She shook her head. "Not from here, but there's another way. The family conference room shares a wall with the waiting area, and the ventilation system carries sound. If you're very quiet, you might be able to hear their conversation." Patricia led me to a small room adjacent to where David and Sarah were sitting. She cracked the door just slightly and motioned for me to listen. At first, all I could hear was the general noise of the hospital. Machines beeping, people walking, distant conversations. Then I heard David's voice, and what he was saying made my heart stop. The doctor said it could take anywhere from 48 hours to a week. We need to be prepared for both scenarios. Sarah's voice came next, and there was something in her tone that I'd never heard before, something cold and calculating. The sooner the better, honestly. Every day that passes is another day someone might start asking questions. "You don't think her father will be a problem, do you?" Vincent's always been protective of Leah. Vincent's an old man who's been declining mentally for years. Even if he suspects something, who's going to believe him? Besides, he has no legal standing here. You're her husband, and I'm her next of kin after you. I had to grip the door frame to keep from falling over. They were talking about Leah's death as if it was inevitable, as if it was something they were expecting, and Sarah's comment about me declining mentally was completely untrue. I was as sharp as I'd ever been, despite what she apparently wanted people to believe. Patricia noticed my distress and gently touched my arm. "Mr. Thompson, there's more you need to know before you decide what to do next." She quietly closed the door and led me further down the hallway, away from where David and Sarah were sitting. We stopped in another small alcove where she could speak without being overheard. "Your daughter was brought in with symptoms of severe poisoning. The blood work showed elevated levels of several toxic substances, but when I tried to discuss this with Dr. Martinez, I was told that the family had already been informed and that no further testing was necessary." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Poisoning? Are you saying someone poisoned my daughter?" "I'm saying the symptoms and blood work are consistent with gradual poisoning over an extended period. The substances found in her system aren't things someone would accidentally ingest. They're things that would need to be administered deliberately, probably in small doses over weeks or months." My mind immediately went to those Sunday dinners. For the past few months, Leah had been complaining about feeling tired and nauseated. We'd attributed it to stress from her job at the marketing firm, but now I realized the timing coincided with when David and Sarah had started insisting on hosting the family dinners at their house instead of mine. "Why are you telling me this? Why haven't you reported it to the authorities?" Patricia's expression became even more serious. "Because I've been watching this family for hours now, and I don't think your daughter's condition is accidental. If I'm right, and I report this officially, they might accelerate whatever they're planning. Right now your daughter is stable, but if they realize someone suspects what's happening," she didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication was clear and terrifying. "What do you think I should do?" "I think you need to find out exactly what they're planning before you reveal that you know what's happening. And Mr. Thompson, you need to be very careful. If they're willing to hurt your daughter, they won't hesitate to hurt you too." As Patricia's words sank in, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family was about to be shattered. My daughter was lying in an ICU bed, poisoned by people she trusted, and I was the only one who could save her. But first I needed to find out just how deep this betrayal went. Patricia led me to a supply closet where we could talk without being overheard. My hands were still shaking from what I'd witnessed, and I couldn't stop thinking about Leah lying helpless in that hospital bed, while the people who were supposed to love her plotted her death. "Mr. Thompson, I need to show you something, but you have to promise me you won't react emotionally. If we're going to help your daughter, we need to be smart about this." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. Patricia pulled out a manila folder that she'd apparently been carrying with her. "These are copies of your daughter's medical records from the past 6 months. I wasn't supposed to access them, but something about this whole situation felt wrong from the moment she was admitted." She opened the folder and showed me a series of lab reports. The medical terminology was mostly gibberish to me, but Patricia explained what I was looking at. "Your daughter has been to the emergency room 4 times in the past 6 months. Each time she presented with symptoms of nausea, weakness, confusion, and stomach pain. Each time she was treated for what appeared to be food poisoning or stress-related illness and sent home. I didn't know she'd been sick so often. She never told me." According to the notes, her husband David was with her for 3 of those visits. He told the medical staff that Leah had been under a lot of stress at work and that she'd been having digestive issues for months. He specifically mentioned that she'd been taking various herbal supplements and vitamins that might be causing the problems. Patricia turned to another page in the folder. "But here's what's interesting. Each time she was admitted, her symptoms were more severe than the time before. That's not consistent with stress-related illness or accidental food poisoning. That's consistent with cumulative poisoning." The implications of what she was saying hit me like a sledgehammer. "You're telling me that David has been poisoning my daughter for months? I'm telling you that someone has been systematically introducing toxic substances into your daughter's system over an extended period. The blood work from tonight shows elevated levels of arsenic, mercury, and several other heavy metals that don't occur naturally in those concentrations. I had to sit down on a supply crate because my legs felt like they might give out. How could no one have caught this before now? Because the doses were small enough that they didn't show up as obvious poisoning in routine blood work, and because someone who knew what they were doing made sure the symptoms looked like common ailments. If I hadn't specifically ordered the heavy metals panel tonight, we still wouldn't know." "Why did you order those tests?" Patricia's expression became grim. "Because of what I overheard David and Sarah discussing while they thought no one was listening. They weren't just talking about your daughter dying, Mr. Thompson. They were talking about inheritance money and life insurance policies. They mentioned specific dollar amounts. My heart felt like it was being crushed in my chest. How much money are we talking about?" According to their conversation, your daughter has a life insurance policy worth $750,000. Plus, she inherited a substantial amount from your late wife's estate, something about real estate investments that are now worth over $1.2 million. I remembered that inheritance. When my wife Margaret died 5 years ago, she left everything to Leah because she knew our daughter would make sure I was taken care of in my old age. The real estate investments had performed better than anyone expected, turning Margaret's modest savings into a significant fortune. David is the beneficiary of the life insurance policy, Patricia continued, and according to what I heard, Sarah stands to inherit a significant portion of the real estate holdings if something happens to Leah. That can't be right. Leah would never have left everything to Sarah. They weren't even that close. Patricia pulled out another document from her folder. This is where it gets really disturbing, Mr. Thompson. 3 months ago, your daughter apparently updated her will. David brought a copy to the hospital tonight for the medical records, claiming it was necessary for treatment decisions. She showed me a copy of the will, and my blood ran cold as I read it. According to the document, if Leah died, her entire estate would be divided between David and Sarah, with me receiving only a token amount of $10,000. This isn't right, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Leah would never have cut me out of her will like this. We talked about it after Margaret died, and she promised that if anything happened to her, I'd be taken care of. Mr. Thompson, do you recognize your daughter's signature on this document? I studied the signature carefully. It looked like Leah's handwriting, but something was off about it. The letters were slightly different from how she usually signed her name, and the pen pressure seemed inconsistent. I think this might be forged, I said. That's what I was thinking too. But even if it is, we need proof before we can do anything about it. And we need to be very careful about how we proceed because right now, your daughter's life is still in immediate danger. Patricia checked her watch again. I need to get back to my rounds before someone notices I'm missing, but there's something else you need to know. David and Sarah aren't planning to wait for your daughter to die naturally from the poisoning. My stomach dropped. What do you mean? I overheard them discussing something about accelerating the timeline. Sarah mentioned that they couldn't afford to wait much longer because someone might start getting suspicious. They're planning to do something tonight. The fear that had been building in my chest suddenly exploded into panic. We have to call the police. We have to do something right now. Mr. Thompson, I understand your urgency, but think about this logically. Right now, we have suspicions and some concerning lab results. But David is your daughter's legal husband, and he has medical power of attorney. Sarah is listed as next of kin. If we make accusations without solid proof, they could have your daughter transferred to another hospital, or even sign a do not resuscitate order. The thought of David having that much control over Leah's life made me feel sick. So what do? We gather evidence, and we make sure your daughter survives long enough for the truth to come out. I'm going to monitor her condition very closely tonight, and I'm going to document everything I observe, but I need you to find out more about their plan. How am I supposed to do that? Patricia thought for a moment, then pulled a small device from her pocket. This is a digital recorder. It's voice-activated and has a 12-hour battery life. If you can get close enough to record them discussing their plans, we'll have the evidence we need. I took the recorder, my hands still trembling. Where am I supposed to hide this? The family conference room where they've been talking. There's a ventilation grate near the ceiling that's loose. If you can get in there and place this device, it should pick up their conversations clearly. The idea of breaking into a hospital room to plant a recording device seemed surreal, but everything about this night had been surreal. My daughter was dying because her own husband and sister were poisoning her for money, and I was apparently the only person who could stop them. What if they catch me? Then you tell them you came to the hospital as soon as you heard about Leah's condition, and you've been looking for them. Act confused and worried like any father would be. They don't know that you know anything yet. Patricia opened the supply closet door slightly and peered out into the hallway. They're still in the waiting area, but they'll probably move to the conference room soon to continue their discussion privately. You need to get that recorder in place before they do. As I prepared to leave the supply closet, Patricia grabbed my arm. Mr. Thompson, there's one more thing. When I was reviewing your daughter's medical records, I noticed something else. The herbal supplements that David told the doctors about, I looked them up and several of them can actually help the body process heavy metals more quickly. What does that mean? It means he wasn't just poisoning your daughter. He was also giving her things that would help clear the toxins from her system just enough to keep her from dying too quickly. He wanted her to suffer for months before the final dose killed her. The calculated cruelty of it left me speechless. This wasn't a crime of passion or desperation. This was a methodical, deliberate torture of my daughter by the two people she trusted most. As I stepped out of the supply closet with the recording device hidden in my jacket pocket, I realized that the next few hours would determine whether Leah lived or died, and whether the people who had betrayed her would get away with murder. Getting into the family conference room without being seen was easier than I expected. The hallway was dimly lit, and most of the hospital staff were busy with their rounds. I found the ventilation grate that Patricia had mentioned. It was indeed loose, just as she he'd said. My arthritic fingers struggled with the screws, but adrenaline gave me strength I didn't know I still had. I placed the recording device inside the vent and carefully replaced the grate, making sure it looked undisturbed. Then I made my way back to a position where I could observe David and Sarah without being seen. I didn't have to wait long. Within 15 minutes, they both stood up from the waiting area and walked directly toward the conference room. My heart pounded as I watched them close the door behind them. If Patricia was right about the sound carrying through the ventilation system, the recorder should pick up every word they said. I positioned myself in the supply closet where Patricia had first shown me the medical records. From there, I could hear muffled voices coming through the wall, but I couldn't make out specific words. I had to trust that the recording device was doing its job. About 20 minutes later, David and Sarah emerged from the conference room. They both looked tense, and Sarah kept checking her phone. They walked back toward the ICU, presumably to check on Leah's condition. This was my chance to retrieve the recorder. I waited until they were out of sight, then quickly made my way back to the conference room. My hands were shaking so badly that it took me 3 attempts to get the ventilation grate loose again. When I finally retrieved the recording device, I could see that it had been activated. The digital display showed that it had recorded 22 minutes of audio. I found an empty patient room down the hall and closed the door behind me. With trembling fingers, I pressed the playback button and put the small speaker close to my ear. What I heard in the first few seconds made my blood run cold. "Can't keep waiting like this," Sarah's voice was saying. "Every day that passes is another risk that someone will figure out what we've been doing." David's voice responded, "I know, but we have to be careful about the timing. If she dies too quickly after being admitted, it might raise questions." "David, we've been planning this for over a year. The slow poisoning worked perfectly. She got sicker gradually. Everyone attributed it to stress, and now she's in the hospital with what looks like a sudden medical crisis. No one suspects anything." My hands clenched into fists as I listened to Sarah talking about my daughter's suffering as if it were a business transaction. This was the same little girl I had taught to ride a bicycle, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, who used to crawl into my lap when she had nightmares. How had she become capable of something so monstrous? The recording continued, and David's voice became more urgent. "The problem is that Dr. Martinez is asking too many questions about her blood work. He wants to run more tests, and if he finds the heavy metals. That's why we need to act tonight," Sarah interrupted. "I brought the final dose. It's enough to cause complete organ failure within 6 to 8 hours. By morning, she'll be gone, and everyone will think her body just couldn't handle the strain of whatever illness she's been fighting." I had to cover my mouth to keep from crying out. They were planning to kill my daughter tonight, and they were discussing it as calmly as if they were planning a dinner menu. "Are you sure about the will?" David asked. "If there are any problems with the documentation, I've told you 100 times it's perfect. I've been practicing Leah's signature for months. The notary who witnessed it is my friend Jenny from the bank. She owes me favors and doesn't ask questions. The will is dated 3 months ago, which gives us plenty of time before anyone could claim she was coerced or incompetent." So Sarah had forged the will. This confirmed what Patricia and I had suspected, but hearing Sarah admit it so casually made me feel sick. She had been planning this betrayal for months, maybe longer. "What about Vincent?" David asked. "He's going to be devastated when Leah dies. What if he contests the will?" Sarah's laugh was cold and bitter. "Vincent is a senile old man who can barely take care of himself. I've been telling everyone for months that he's been having memory problems and confusion. By the time probate is settled, no one will take his claims seriously. Besides, he's getting $10,000 from the will. That's more than generous for someone who contributed nothing to Leah's success." The cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow. Not only was Sarah planning to murder her own sister, but she had been systematically destroying my reputation to ensure that no one would believe me if I tried to expose her. "The life insurance money will come to me within 30 days, David continued. $750,000. Plus, once the real estate is liquidated, Sarah's share should be around $800,000. We'll have over $1.5 million to split. And Leah will finally stop being the golden child who gets everything handed to her," Sarah said, her voice full of venom. "Do you know what it's like growing up with a sister who everyone thinks is perfect, who gets all the attention, all the praise, all the opportunities? Even our own mother left everything to Leah instead of dividing it equally between us." I realized that this wasn't just about money. Sarah's resentment toward Leah went back decades, to childhood jealousies that had festered and grown into something deadly. In her twisted mind, she probably believed that Leah deserved to die. "When are you going to administer the final dose?" David asked. "I'll wait until the night shift nurse goes on her break around 2 in the morning. Security is minimal at that hour, and most of the medical staff will be busy with other patients. I can slip into Leah's room, inject the substance into her IV line, and be gone before anyone notices." "What about the medical examiner? Won't an autopsy show the poison? The substances I've been using break down quickly in the body after death. By the time an autopsy is performed, they'll be undetectable. And since she's been sick for months with documented symptoms, No one will question that she died from complications related to her ongoing health problems. Sarah had thought of everything. This wasn't the impulsive act of a desperate person. It was a carefully planned murder that had been in the works for over a year. She had been slowly killing her own sister while pretending to care about her, all while positioning herself to inherit a fortune. "I need to get back to the waiting area," David said. "The nurses will expect me to be there when it happens. I need to be the grieving husband who was by her side until the end. And I'll play the devastated sister who rushed to the hospital as soon as I heard. We'll comfort each other through this terrible tragedy, and everyone will admire how strong we are in the face of such a sudden loss." The recording continued for a few more minutes with them discussing practical details about the funeral arrangements and how quickly they could access Leah's accounts. Every word made me more horrified at the depth of their callousness. When the recording finally ended, I sat in that empty hospital room for several minutes trying to process what I had just heard. My younger daughter was planning to murder my older daughter tonight, and she had been systematically poisoning her for months while I sat at Sunday dinners completely oblivious to what was happening. I thought about all the times Sarah had volunteered to help serve dinner, all the times she had insisted on making Leah's favorite dishes. She had been using those opportunities to slowly poison her own sister, and I had been grateful for her help and thoughtfulness. The worst part was realizing how long this had been going on. Sarah mentioned that they had been planning this for over a year. That meant she had been sitting at family gatherings, hugging Leah goodbye, calling to check on her when she was feeling sick, all while knowing that she was the cause of Leah's suffering. I checked the time on my phone. It was 11:45. According to the recording, Sarah planned to act around 2 in the morning, which gave me just over 2 hours to figure out how to stop her. But I couldn't just go to the police with a recording. By the time they investigated and took action, it might be too late. I needed to find Patricia and figure out how to protect Leah through the night. Then, in the morning, when we had solid evidence of attempted murder, we could have both Sarah and David arrested. But as I stood up to leave the empty room, I heard footsteps in the hallway outside. Through the small window in the door, I could see Sarah walking past, heading toward the ICU. In her hand was a small medical vial filled with clear liquid. She wasn't waiting until 2 in the morning. She was going to kill my daughter right now, and I was the only person who could stop her. I burst out of the empty room and rushed down the hallway toward the ICU, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. Sarah was already through the security doors, and I could see her heading directly toward Leah's room. The night shift was in full swing, and the hallway was mostly empty except for the occasional nurse moving between rooms. I tried to follow Sarah through the security doors, but they required a key card that I didn't have. Through the glass windows, I could see her entering Leah's room. My daughter was unconscious, surrounded by machines that were keeping her alive, completely helpless, as her own sister prepared to murder her. I ran to the nurse's station, looking frantically for Patricia, but she was nowhere to be seen. A young nurse I didn't recognize looked up at me with concern. "Sir, are you okay? You look like you're in distress. I need to get into the ICU immediately. My daughter is in danger." The nurse looked confused. "Sir, visiting hours ended at 9 o'clock. Are you having a medical emergency?" I realized that trying to explain the situation to this stranger would take too long. Sarah could be injecting the poison into Leah's IV at that very moment. I needed to get into that room now. "Please, I'm begging you. My daughter is Leah Mitchell in room 407. Her sister is in there right now, and I think she's going to hurt her." The nurse's expression became more concerned, but she still looked skeptical. "Sir, I think you might be confused. The patient's sister has been here all evening. She's been very worried about her condition." "That's exactly the problem. Please, just let me into the room. I can explain everything once my daughter is safe." Before the nurse could respond, I heard Patricia's voice behind me. "Vincent, what's happening?" I turned around, relief flooding through me at the sight of her familiar face. "Sarah's in Leah's room right now with some kind of poison." She moved up her timeline. "She's not waiting until 2 in the morning. Patricia's face went pale. "Are you sure?" I pulled out the recording device and quickly explained what I had overheard. Patricia listened to a few seconds of the recording, her expression growing more horrified with each word. "We need to get in there immediately," she said, pulling out her key card. "But we have to be smart about this. If we accuse her directly and we're wrong, we're not wrong. I heard her confessing to months of poisoning Leah. She's in there right now with the final dose." Patricia swiped her key card and the security doors opened. We rushed through the ICU toward Leah's room. But as we approached, we could see that Sarah was no longer inside. The room appeared empty except for Leah lying motionless in her bed. "Where did she go?" I whispered. Patricia checked the room quickly, examining Leah's IV lines and monitoring equipment. "Everything looks normal, but that doesn't mean she didn't do something. We need to check with the security desk to see if they have footage of what happened in this room." We hurried to the security office, where a bored-looking guard was monitoring multiple screens showing different areas of the hospital. Patricia explained that we needed to review footage from the ICU immediately. "I can't just show hospital security footage to visitors," the guard said. "You need authorization from hospital administration. This is a matter of life and death, Patricia said firmly. A patient may have been deliberately harmed by a family member. I'm invoking emergency medical protocol. The guard looked uncertain, but Patricia's authoritative tone convinced him. He pulled up the footage from the ICU cameras and fast-forwarded to show the past 30 minutes. On the screen, we could see Sarah entering Leah's room at 11:52. She approached the bed and appeared to be checking on Leah's condition, acting like any concerned sister would. But then, when she thought no one was looking, she pulled out a small vial and a syringe. My stomach lurched as I watched her fill the syringe with clear liquid from the vial. She looked around the room nervously, then approached Leah's IV line. Just as she was about to inject the substance, we could see her freeze and quickly hide the syringe behind her back. A nurse had entered the room to check on Leah's vital signs. Sarah smiled and chatted pleasantly with the nurse for several minutes, the whole time hiding the murder weapon behind her back. When the nurse left, Sarah waited another few minutes, then carefully disposed of the syringe in the medical waste container and left the room. She didn't inject the poison, Patricia said, relief evident in her voice. The nurse interrupted her before she could do it, but my relief was short-lived as I realized what this meant. She still has the poison, and she's going to try again as soon as she gets another opportunity. The security guard looked confused. Are you saying that woman was trying to poison the patient? We have evidence that she's been systematically poisoning her own sister for months, I said, and we just watched her attempt to deliver what would have been a fatal dose. Patricia turned to the guard. We need you to call hospital security immediately and have Sarah Mitchell detained, and we need to contact the police. I can't just detain someone based on what you think you saw on a security camera. You need to file a formal complaint with. There's no time for bureaucracy, I interrupted. She's going to try again. And next time there might not be a nurse to interrupt her. Patricia was already on her phone calling someone. After a brief conversation, she hung up and turned to us. I just spoke with Dr. Martinez. He's coming up here immediately, and he's bringing the hospital administrator with him. Vincent, do you still have that recording? I handed her the device, and she quickly queued up the most incriminating parts of Sarah and David's conversation. When Dr. Martinez arrived 15 minutes later with the hospital administrator, a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Chen, Patricia played the recording for them. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Mrs. Chen's face went white as she listened to Sarah casually discussing the best time to murder her sister. Dr. Martinez looked physically sick as he heard David talking about the life insurance money they would collect. This is unbelievable, Dr. Martinez said. I've been treating this patient for what I thought was a mysterious illness, and her own family has been poisoning her. Where are they now? Mrs. Chen asked. The security guard checked his monitors. The husband is still in the waiting area. The sister left about 10 minutes ago. She said she was going to get some coffee from the cafeteria. We need to find her before she comes back, Patricia said. She still has that poison, and she's not going to give up just because her first attempt failed. Mrs. Chen was already on her phone with hospital security, giving them descriptions of both Sarah and David. I'm also calling the police, she said. This is attempted murder, and we need law enforcement involved immediately. Dr. Martinez turned to me. Mr. Thompson, I owe you an apology. If you hadn't uncovered this plot, your daughter would probably be dead by morning. We're going to start immediate treatment to remove the toxins from her system, and I'm confident she'll make a full recovery. For the first time in hours, I felt like I could breathe again. Leah was going to live. The people who had tried to murder her were about to be arrested. Justice was finally going to be served. But even as relief washed over me, I couldn't stop thinking about how close we had come to losing everything. If that nurse hadn't walked into Leah's room at exactly the right moment, if Patricia hadn't been suspicious enough to investigate, if I hadn't been brave enough to plant that recording device, Sarah would have succeeded. My own daughter would have gotten away with murdering her sister for money, and I would have spent the rest of my life grieving for Leah while never knowing that Sarah was responsible for her death. 20 minutes later, we watched through the security monitors as police officers arrested David in the hospital waiting area. He tried to act confused and innocent, claiming he had no idea what they were talking about, but his performance wasn't convincing anyone. Sarah was found in the hospital parking garage, apparently trying to leave without saying goodbye to anyone. When the police searched her purse, they found the vial of poison along with detailed notes about dosages and timing. She had been planning this murder with the thoroughness of a medical professional. As I watched my younger daughter being handcuffed and read her rights, I felt a complex mixture of emotions. There was relief that Leah was safe, satisfaction that justice was being served, but also a profound sadness that our family had been destroyed by greed and jealousy. The little girl I had raised, who I had loved and protected for 35 years, had become a cold-blooded killer, and I was the one who had stopped her. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of police interviews, medical consultations, and the slow process of watching Leah begin her recovery. Dr. Martinez had immediately started her on chelation therapy, to remove the heavy metals from her system, and the improvement was remarkable. Within 24 hours, she was conscious and asking questions about what had happened. I was sitting beside her bed when she first opened her eyes and looked at me with recognition. Her voice was weak and raspy, but she was unmistakably my Leah again. "Dad? What happened? Why am I in the hospital?" I had been dreading this moment, trying to figure out how to tell my daughter that her own sister and husband had been slowly poisoning her for months. How do you explain that level of betrayal to someone who's just beginning to recover from the physical trauma? "You've been very sick, sweetheart, but you're going to be okay now. The doctors are taking good care of you." Leah tried to sit up, but the effort was too much for her weakened body. I remember feeling terrible for so long, and David said I was just stressed from work, but it kept getting worse. "Where is David? And Sarah? Are they okay?" The question I had been hoping to avoid. I took her hand gently, choosing my words carefully. "Leah, there are some things we need to talk about when you're feeling stronger. Right now, the most important thing is focusing on your recovery." But Leah had always been perceptive, even as a child. She could sense when something was wrong, and she wasn't going to let this go. "Dad, you're scaring me. What aren't you telling me? Where is my husband?" Before I could answer, Detective Rodriguez entered the room. She was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes but a serious demeanor. She had been assigned to the case and had been interviewing witnesses and gathering evidence for the past 2 days. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm Detective Rodriguez. I'm glad to see you're awake and alert. When you're feeling up to it, I'll need to ask you some questions about your recent illness." Leah looked confused and frightened. "Questions? I don't understand. What kind of questions?" Detective Rodriguez glanced at me and I nodded. Leah needed to know the truth even if it was going to devastate her. "Ms. Mitchell, we have evidence that suggests your illness wasn't natural. We believe someone has been deliberately poisoning you over an extended period of time." The color drained from Leah's face. "Poisoning? That's impossible. Who would want to hurt me?" "I'm afraid the evidence points to your husband David and your sister Sarah. They've both been arrested and charged with attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder." I watched my daughter's world crumble as the detective's words sank in. Her eyes filled with tears and she started shaking her head in denial. "No, that can't be true. David loves me. Sarah is my sister. They would never hurt me. There has to be some mistake." Detective Rodriguez pulled out a tablet and showed Leah some of the evidence they had gathered. Bank records showing that David had been researching the symptoms of heavy metal poisoning. Medical records documenting Leah's increasingly frequent hospital visits. And most damning of all, the recording of Sarah and David discussing their plan to kill her. As Leah listened to her sister's voice casually discussing the best time to murder her, I watched something break inside my daughter. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating that she seemed to shrink into herself. "Why?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Why would they do this to me?" Detective Rodriguez's expression softened. "According to the evidence we've gathered, it appears to have been motivated by financial gain. Your life insurance policy and inheritance from your mother's estate represent a significant amount of money. But I would have shared everything with Sarah if she had just asked. She didn't need to kill me for it. I would have given her whatever she wanted." That was so typical of Leah. Even after learning that her sister had tried to murder her, her first instinct was to think about how she could have helped her. It broke my heart to see her trying to make sense of such senseless cruelty. Over the next few days, as Leah continued to recover physically, the full scope of Sarah and David's conspiracy became clear. Detective Rodriguez shared some of the details with us as the investigation progressed. They had found extensive internet search histories on both David's and Sarah's computers. Searches for undetectable poisons, symptoms of heavy metal poisoning, how long does arsenic stay in the body after death, and dozens of other incriminating queries going back over 18 months. Sarah's bank records showed that she had made several large purchases from chemical supply companies, always paying with cash to avoid leaving a paper trail. They had also found handwritten notes in her apartment detailing the dosages and timing of the poison administration. Perhaps most disturbing was the discovery of a detailed timeline Sarah had created, mapping out Leah's decline and death over a period of 2 years. She had planned to gradually increase the poison doses, making Leah sicker and sicker until her body finally succumbed. The timeline included notes about which symptoms to expect at each stage and how to respond when family members or doctors expressed concern. David's role had been to monitor Leah's condition and provide medical cover for her symptoms. As her husband, he was able to influence her medical care, steering doctors away from tests that might detect the poisoning and ensuring that her illness was attributed to stress or other benign causes. They had also found evidence that Sarah had been forging Leah's signature for months, practicing until she could replicate it perfectly. The forged will was just one of several documents she had created. She had also forged power of attorney papers and even a fake letter from Leah expressing her wish to be cremated immediately after death, which would have destroyed any evidence of poisoning. The level of premeditation was staggering. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of weakness. Sarah and David had been planning to murder Leah for almost 2 years, and they had thought through every detail to ensure they wouldn't be caught. The thing that gets me, Detective Rodriguez told me during one of our meetings, is how normal they both seemed. Sarah was working as a bank teller, volunteering at her church, maintaining friendships. David was a respected accountant with no criminal history. From the outside, they looked like ordinary, law-abiding citizens. How do people become capable of something like this? I asked. In my experience, it usually starts with smaller betrayals and lies, then escalates over time. Sarah may have started by resenting her sister's success, then began to fantasize about what her life would be like if Leah was gone. Once she met David and realized he was equally motivated by greed, they enabled each other's worst impulses. The detective paused, then continued. What's particularly disturbing is how they were able to compartmentalize their actions. Sarah was having regular family dinners with Leah, calling to check on her when she was sick, even helping to care for her during the worst episodes of illness. She was able to look her sister in the eye while knowing she was the cause of her suffering. As the investigation continued, more disturbing details emerged. They found that Sarah had been keeping a journal documenting Leah's decline, writing about her sister's symptoms and suffering with what could only be described as satisfaction. Some of the entries were so callous and cruel that even seasoned detectives were shocked by them. One entry, dated just 3 weeks before Leah's hospitalization, read, "Elle is getting weaker every day. She can barely make it through a full day at work now. Dee says her liver function is starting to decline, which means we're in the final phase. It's amazing how easy this has been. She trusts us completely." Another entry, written after one of Leah's emergency room visits, said, "Had to comfort Elle today after she got sick at work again. She was crying and saying she didn't understand what was wrong with her. I told her it was probably just stress and that she should try to relax more. If only she knew that relaxing is the last thing she'll ever do." Reading these entries made me physically ill. This was my daughter Sarah, the little girl I had read bedtime stories to, writing about torturing her own sister with the detached clinical interest of a scientist observing a lab experiment. The psychological evaluation that was ordered as part of the legal proceedings revealed that Sarah showed clear signs of narcissistic personality disorder and antisocial tendencies. The psychologist explained that Sarah had likely been harboring resentment toward Leah for years, feeling that her sister had received preferential treatment and opportunities. When my wife Margaret died and left her estate to Leah, it had apparently been the final trigger that pushed Sarah over the edge from resentment into homicidal rage. In her mind, Leah had once again been chosen over her, and the only way to correct this perceived injustice was to take what she believed should have been hers. David's motivation was more straightforward, pure greed. He had married Leah primarily for her money, and had grown impatient waiting for her to die naturally. When Sarah approached him with her plan, he saw it as a business proposition that would make them both wealthy. As I learned these details, I struggled with my own guilt and regret. How had I failed to see what was happening? How had I sat at those Sunday dinners, grateful for Sarah's helpfulness, while she was slowly murdering her own sister right in front of me? Patricia, who had become a close friend during this ordeal, reminded me that even trained medical professionals had missed the signs of poisoning. Leah's symptoms were consistent with several different conditions, she told me, and Sarah and David were very good at manipulating the situation to avoid suspicion. You couldn't have known. But knowing that intellectually didn't ease the emotional weight of feeling like I had failed to protect my daughter when she needed me most. 6 months later, I was sitting in a courtroom watching my younger daughter receive her sentence. Sarah had been found guilty on all charges: attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, forgery, and fraud. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole for 15 years. As the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, Sarah turned to look at Leah and me one last time. For just a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of remorse in her eyes, but then her expression hardened into the same cold indifference she had shown throughout the trial. David had been sentenced 3 weeks earlier to 20 years in prison. Unlike Sarah, he had shown some genuine remorse during his testimony, admitting that greed had clouded his judgment and expressing regret for the pain he had caused. But his apologies felt hollow after everything we had learned about the calculated nature of their conspiracy. Leah had made a remarkable physical recovery. The chelation therapy had successfully removed most of the toxins from her system, and her strength had returned gradually over the months. Emotionally, the healing process was taking longer, but she was working with a therapist and making progress. The hardest part for Leah had been accepting that the two people she trusted most in the world had betrayed her so completely. During the trial, she had to listen to detailed testimony about how they had planned her death and see evidence of their complete lack of regard for her life and well-being. "I keep thinking about all the times Sarah hugged me goodbye after those Sunday dinners," Leah told me one evening as we sat on my back porch. "She would tell me to take care of myself and call if I needed anything, and the whole time, She knew she was the reason I was getting sicker. I think about those dinners too, I said. I was so grateful that Sarah was helping with the cooking and serving. I thought it showed how much she cared about family. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sunset. These quiet moments together had become precious to both of us. The ordeal had brought us closer than we had been in years, and I was grateful for this unexpected gift that had emerged from such darkness. Dad, can I ask you something that's been bothering me? Of course, sweetheart. Do you think there were signs I should have noticed? Could I have figured out what they were doing before it got so bad? I had been expecting this question. Leah had been blaming herself for not recognizing that she was being poisoned, even though everyone, doctors, nurses, family members, had failed to identify what was happening. Leah, they were very careful to make your symptoms look like other conditions, and as your husband, David was in the perfect position to manipulate your medical care and influence how you interpreted what was happening to your body. Even if you had suspected something, who would you have suspected? The people trying to kill you were the same people you would have turned to for help. I know that makes sense logically, but I still feel so stupid for trusting them. You trusted them because that's what normal, healthy people do. They trust their family members and spouses. The fact that you weren't suspicious of the people closest to you doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. We had had variations of this conversation many times over the past few months. Leah was struggling with the idea that she could have been so completely deceived by people she loved. Her therapist had explained that this was a normal response to such an extreme betrayal, but knowing it was normal didn't make it easier to bear. One of the most difficult aspects of the whole experience had been dealing with the reaction of extended family and friends. Some people had been incredibly supportive, rallying around Leah and expressing outrage at what Sarah and David had done, but others had struggled to believe that such a thing was possible even with overwhelming evidence. A few of our relatives had actually suggested that we were being too harsh in pursuing criminal charges against Sarah. She's still family, Leah's aunt had said. Maybe she just made a mistake and got in over her head. I had to bite my tongue to keep from responding angrily. A mistake is forgetting someone's birthday or accidentally breaking a dish. Slowly poisoning your sister for months while planning to murder her for money is not a mistake. It's evil, but I had learned that some people simply cannot accept that someone they know is capable of such cruelty. It's easier for them to minimize the crime or blame the victims than to confront the uncomfortable truth that monsters sometimes look like ordinary people. The financial aspects of the case had also been complicated to resolve. The forged will was obviously invalid, so Leah's original will remained in effect. But Sarah had managed to steal approximately $15,000 from Leah's accounts over the months leading up to the attempted murder, using forged signatures to authorize transfers. The life insurance company had initially been reluctant to pay out the policy, arguing that the attempt on Leah's life created too much uncertainty about the validity of the policy. It took several months of legal wrangling before they agreed to restore the policy to its original terms. Most importantly, Leah had decided to update her will and financial arrangements to ensure that nothing like this could happen again. She had removed David as her beneficiary and power of attorney, and had established a trust that would make it much more difficult for anyone to manipulate her finances in the future. I'm thinking about selling Mom's real estate investments, Leah told me one afternoon as we reviewed her financial situation. I know they're worth a lot of money, but I can't stop thinking about how Sarah was willing to kill me for them. Maybe it would be better to liquidate everything and donate a significant portion to charity. That's your decision to make, sweetheart, but don't let Sarah's greed rob you of your mother's legacy. She worked hard for those investments because she wanted to provide security for you. I know, but I keep thinking about what the detective said. That this all started when Mom left everything to me instead of dividing it equally. Maybe if I had shared it with Sarah from the beginning, none of this would have happened. Leah, your mother left her estate to you because she trusted your judgment and knew you would use the money wisely. She also knew that Sarah had problems with money management and responsibility. Your mother's decision was based on years of observing both of her daughters. But what if Sarah felt like Mom loved me more? Your mother loved both of you, but love doesn't mean treating everyone exactly the same. It means making decisions based on what's best for each person. Your mother left her money to you because she believed you would be responsible with it, and she was right. I paused, then continued. Besides, Sarah's actions prove that your mother's concerns about her were justified. Someone who would murder their own sister for money is exactly the kind of person who shouldn't inherit a large sum. Over time, Leah began to accept that she wasn't responsible for Sarah's choices. The therapy helped, but I think the real turning point came when she received a letter from Sarah in prison. The letter was not an apology. Instead, it was a bitter screed in which Sarah blamed everyone else for her situation. She blamed me for being a poor father who favored Leah. She blamed Margaret for leaving her estate unequally divided. She blamed David for involving her in his scheme, conveniently forgetting that the evidence showed she had been the driving force behind the plan. Most telling of all, she blamed Leah for having everything handed to her and for making people think she was perfect. Even in prison, facing the consequences of her actions, Sarah was unable to take responsibility for her choices. Reading that letter was actually liberating, Leah told me afterward. It made me realize that Sarah has been living in a fantasy world where she's the victim and everyone else is responsible for her problems. Nothing I could have done differently would have changed what happened. The letter also revealed something that chilled me to the bone. In her twisted justification for her actions, Sarah wrote, "If Leah had just died quietly like she was supposed to, none of this would have been a problem. Everyone would have grieved for a while and then moved on, and David and I would have had the life we deserved." Even now, months after her conviction, Sarah still believed that murdering her sister would have been acceptable if she had simply gotten away with it. She felt no remorse for the actual crime, only anger that she had been caught. As I write this, it's been almost a year since that terrible night at the hospital. Leah has fully recovered her health and is back to work at the marketing firm, though she's considering starting her own business. She's dating someone new, a kind man who knows about everything that happened and admires her strength in surviving it. I've moved into a smaller house closer to Leah's neighborhood. We see each other several times a week, and those Sunday dinners have resumed, though now we're much more careful about who we invite to join us. The experience taught me several important lessons. First, that evil can hide behind familiar faces and loving gestures. Sarah was able to maintain the appearance of a caring sister while slowly poisoning Leah because I believed that family members inherently love and protect each other. Second, I learned that trust, once broken on this scale, changes you forever. Both Leah and I are more cautious now about the people we let into our lives. We pay attention to inconsistencies and red flags that we might have ignored before. But most importantly, I learned that surviving betrayal can make you stronger and more grateful for genuine love. The bond between Leah and me has deepened through this shared trauma. We don't take our relationship for granted anymore, and we're more intentional about expressing our love and appreciation for each other. Patricia and I have remained close friends. She often tells me that if I hadn't had the courage to investigate what was happening, Leah would certainly have died that night. But I know that without her medical expertise and willingness to break protocol to protect a patient, I never would have uncovered the truth in time. Sometimes people ask me if I hate Sarah for what she did. The answer is complicated. I'm devastated by her choices and horrified by her cruelty, but I can't completely erase 35 years of loving her as my daughter. What I feel is more like grief. Grief for the person I thought she was, and for the family we could have been if she had chosen differently. I also feel profound gratitude that Leah survived, and that we discovered the truth before it was too late. Despite everything we lost, we gained something precious, the certainty that our love for each other is real and unshakable. As I finish writing this account, I'm sitting in my living room while Leah makes dinner in my kitchen. She's humming softly as she cooks, and the sound fills me with more joy than I can express. There was a time when I thought I might never hear that sound again. The nightmare is over. Justice has been served, and my daughter is alive, healthy, and building a new life founded on truth instead of lies. That's enough for any father to ask for.